Peppa Pig, the school that isn't there. It all started on a Monday. Madame Gazelle told the class that today's lessons would be held in the old building, a place where children used to study long ago. "It's just nearby," she said. "A short walk for a change of scenery." Peppa was surprised. No one had ever mentioned another school, not teachers, not even her parents. The children walked along a narrow path outside the town. The wind grew stronger. The sun hid behind clouds. Soon, a building appeared, grey, cracked, with tall, narrow windows. It was unnaturally quiet. "Is it on the map?" asked Pedro. Madame Gazelle smiled but didn't answer. Inside it was dim. The walls were stained. The doors creaked. They were led to a classroom at the end of the hall. Desks were crooked. Chairs didn't match. On the board, faint scratches remained, as if someone had written with a nail. "We're only here for one day," said Madame Gazelle. "Start drawing." But Peppa couldn't focus. The classroom window faced an empty field. But each time she looked away and back again, it felt like someone was standing behind the glass. Footsteps echoed in the hall, though no one had left. Sometimes there was a soft creaking sound, and then whispers, very close to the floor. During break, the children walked to the stairs. "Let's go up," Zoe suggested. Madame Gazelle appeared suddenly. "You mustn't go upstairs." Her voice sounded strange, muffled, as if coming from far away. The day crawled by slowly. The hallway clock didn't tick. Pedro said the mirrors in the bathroom were all covered with paper. Rebecca noticed Madame Gazelle's coat had buttons sewn on the wrong side. When it was finally time to leave, the children were relieved. But it was already getting dark outside, though it should have been early afternoon. Madame Gazelle told them to walk in a line. Peppa lingered, looking back. Figures stood in the windows, still, shadowy. They didn't move, but they were watching. That evening, Peppa opened a map on her tablet. The school they visited wasn't there. She showed Daddy Pig. "We were here today," she said, "but there's nothing on the map." Daddy Pig looked closely. "There hasn't been anything here for years, Peppa. I've walked by that spot hundreds of times, just a field." "But we were inside," Peppa insisted. Daddy shrugged. "Maybe it was a temporary structure, something old, but it shouldn't be there." That night, Peppa couldn't sleep. Before bed, she opened her backpack. At the bottom lay a scrap of paper, dusty, crumpled. On it, a message scratched in black charcoal. "We are still here." Peppa Pig The Cracks. It started as just a tiny line, almost invisible in the corner of Peppa's bedroom. She thought it was just a crack in the paint. Maybe someone had bumped into the wall. "Mummy, look," she said that evening, pointing. Mummy Pig glanced over, nodded and said, "The house has probably settled a bit. Nothing to worry about. Daddy will fix it." But Daddy forgot, and the crack stayed. The next day, Peppa noticed it had grown longer. Now it stretched upward slightly, like a tree branch reaching toward the ceiling. "That's strange," she muttered. "Maybe I'm imagining it." But each day, the crack grew, first thin, then a little wider. After a few days, it curved unnaturally, like someone had drawn it with a finger. More cracks appeared nearby, one, then another. "Is our house okay?" Peppa asked Daddy Pig. "Of course," he laughed. "Walls crack sometimes. We'll fix it." They never did. A week later, the whole wall was laced with thin cracks. Some of them vanished during the day, only to return by night. One night, Peppa woke up and saw the crack moving, slightly, as if something inside was breathing. She got out of bed and walked closer, pressed her ear against it. Inside, a sound. Very quiet, scraping. A knock, slow, 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. Peppa jumped back. "George," she whispered. Her brother was asleep, breathing steadily. In the morning, she found a small, dusty scrap of paper beneath the crack, very old, almost falling apart. On it, a single word, "Open." Peppa didn't tell her parents. She covered the crack with bandages, several layers, then hung a picture over it. But by nightfall, the picture had fallen. The tape was torn away. New lines appeared on the wall, not cracks anymore, almost like letters. She backed away to the door, but the door wouldn't open. Something inside the wall was moving, slowly, like it was exhaling. She screamed. Mummy and Daddy rushed in. It's, Peppa gasped, pointing. But on the wall, nothing, no cracks, no words, just a perfectly smooth surface. You probably had a bad dream, said Mummy Pig gently. Let's try to forget about it. But Peppa couldn't forget, because that night, when she turned to face the wall, she saw movement right where the crack had been, and then a voice, a whisper. I'm almost out, don't turn around. Peppa Pig, The Wrong Drawing. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. George was quietly sitting at the kitchen table with crayons and a large sheet of paper. Daddy Pig was sipping tea. Mummy Pig was reading a magazine. Peppa came closer and saw George was drawing children. Is that your class? She asked. Yes, he nodded. All of them. In the drawing stood Rebecca, Zoe, Pedro, Danny, everyone Peppa knew. But they all had the same eyes, black dots. Their smiles were long and flat. They stood in the same pose, arms hanging down, on a white background. Even George's dinosaur was drawn, a bit to the side and with the same eyes. Why are you drawing them? Just so they'll be here, always. Peppa frowned, but said nothing. The next morning at school, the teacher said Rebecca didn't come in, then Zoe didn't come, then Pedro. Every day someone was missing. No explanations, no notes from parents. Maybe they're sick, said Mummy Pig. All at once, Peppa whispered. One evening, she walked into George's room and saw him drawing again. Another sheet, the same figures, the same emptiness. But now there were shadows in the background, long, like the sun was shining from behind, and their eyes were different, darker, deeper. What is this? They're standing, still. You didn't draw me too, did you? He didn't answer. Peppa went to the drawer and pulled out the old drawings, all the same, and each time, someone disappeared in real life, but appeared again on paper. That night, she woke up. The nightlight flickered. The room was cold. George was standing at the door, holding a piece of paper in his hooves. I drew you, he said. George, please. Peppa's heart started to pound. You're standing in the back of the class, next to Rebecca. I don't want to. I shouldn't be there. Too late. He stepped closer, showed her the drawing. Peppa looked at her image. It was empty, no eyes, no mouth, just a silhouette. And at the bottom of the page, a note. You're the last one. Peppa tore the drawing from George's hooves, ran to the kitchen, and threw it into the stove. The paper caught fire. She waited until it turned to ash. But when she turned around, George stood at the door with a new sheet. I remembered it. That night, she locked her door, shut the window, hid the crayons. But she still heard scratching on the floor. Steady, slow. In the morning, she opened the desk drawer. A paper lay there, blank. Only in the corner, a faint shadow, small, shaped like her, and a note. It's already too late. Peppa Pig, The Sleep. It all began quietly. A normal day. The kitchen smelled like toast. Mummy Pig stirred her tea. Daddy Pig read the newspaper, occasionally grunting and turning a page. George was drawing a dinosaur. Peppa sat by the window. The sun looked pale, almost glassy. The sky was light, but without light, as if the day was only pretending to be day. Everything seemed normal, until the evening. George was the first to fall asleep, early. Right at the table, with his head on his arms, he didn't say a word, didn't yawn, he just closed his eyes. Peppa tried to wake him, shook his shoulder, called his name. No reaction. He was breathing calmly. His face was peaceful. Daddy Pig carried him to bed. Mummy Pig said softly, "He must be tired." But her eyes looked uneasy. The next morning, Mummy Pig didn't wake up. She lay still, as if in a deep sleep. Peppa called to her, shook her gently. Nothing, just slow breathing. Her lips slightly parted. Daddy Pig said nothing. He brought her tea. Nothing. Shook her. No response. He just stood there, staring, clutching the newspaper. The next day, Daddy Pig fell asleep too, in his chair, newspaper on his lap, eyes open. Peppa leaned in. He didn't blink, didn't move, but his chest rose and fell, as if breathing, but not on purpose. Peppa was alone. At first, she tried to follow the usual routine, made herself breakfast, sat by the window, drew pictures, talked out loud. But the house felt different. The air, heavy, the rooms, strangely empty. Her footsteps made no echo, as if the house was no longer real. She went outside. The path was clear. No footprints, no breeze. The world had stopped. Peppa knocked on neighbors' doors, called out, rang doorbells. Silence. Behind the windows, silhouettes, some lying down, some sitting, all still. Everyone was asleep. She walked through the town. It was spotless. Benches, empty, shops, open but abandoned. A shopping cart stood in the middle of an aisle, as if someone let go of it and vanished. Each day grew quieter. Even the birds had stopped singing. Every sound Peppa made felt muted. She banged on pots, bounced a ball off the wall, dropped a plate. Everything sounded distant, as if she were underwater. On the third day, she returned home, sat between her parents and George. They were still breathing, warm, but not alive. She looked in the mirror. Her reflection stared back. Same face, same eyes. She blinked, turned away, then looked back. The reflection hadn't blinked. She walked closer. It sat slightly straighter, looked deeper, still unmoving. That night, her body grew heavier. Eyes refused to stay open. Her limbs slowed. Her head dipped. But inside, a voice whispered, "Don't sleep." Peppa lay down next to George, held him, listened to him breathe, slowly, calmly. She didn't want to close her eyes, but they closed anyway. And just before she slipped away, she looked one last time at the mirror. Her reflection was still sitting there, watching her, staring straight ahead, eyes wide open, still, unblinking.
Peppa Pig The Tunnel. It started on an ordinary day. Peppa and George were walking to the park. The weather was calm, the sky pale white, no sun, no rain. Peppa held George's hoof. He was quieter than usual. They passed the swings, the benches, and then George stopped. Peppa looked ahead. Between the bushes was an opening that hadn't been there before. The ground dipped slightly, like it had sunken. The entrance was low, stone-lined. Too neat, too precise. Peppa frowned. George let go of her hoof and stepped forward, without a word, calmly, as if he knew where he was going. She called out, but he was already gone. The tunnel was darker than it should have been. The light from behind didn't reach in. Peppa entered. One step, then another, until she was surrounded by thick, sticky silence. She walked along the narrow stone passage, each step echoing dull and strange, like the ground wasn't quite ground. The walls weren't wet, but they smelled of damp stone, and the air felt perfectly still, like no breeze, no echo. When Peppa stepped out, she found herself in the park. At first glance, the same one, but something was off. The trees were taller, their branches too symmetrical. The swings hung still, even with no wind. The grass was pale, the sound muffled, no birds. The park sign had the same shape, but the letters were wrong. They looked copied, like someone had drawn them from memory. She walked home. It was where it should be. Same roof, same windows, but the door hung crooked, and on it was a plaque that read, "The Pig Family," written in a style that wasn't theirs. Inside, the house smelled like home, but only in the hallway. Further in, the scent vanished. The kitchen had 3 cups, one half full, 2 empty and unwashed. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table, but when she blinked, the chair was empty. The family photos on the wall looked old. They showed her, George, Mummy, Daddy, but the faces were wrong. Office. Like someone tried to recreate them from memory. She went upstairs to her room. The toys were in the right places, but George's dinosaur had blue eyes, not black, and her favorite doll was facing the wall. She had never left it like that. Peppa opened the wardrobe. Only one dress hung inside, red, like hers, but far too big. On the windowsill lay a drawing, done in pencil. It showed the tunnel. Beneath it, a note in a child's writing, "I'm inside." In the backyard stood another tunnel, wider, not the same, but similar. Peppa peered in. Nothing, just darkness. On the ground before it sat a pale stone. Pressed into it, a small hoof print. She walked back to the park. It was still empty, but on every bench lay a toy, each one slightly wrong. A doll with two left legs, a bear with both eyes on one side. Returning home took longer, each step stretched. When she arrived, the door was open. On the hallway floor, footprints, wet, leading inward. The lights were on inside, but when she called out, no one answered. By the fourth day, she stopped calling. The tunnel behind the house was gone. The photos on the wall had faded, and in her room, another dress, smaller. In the kitchen, 4 cups. One was new. On it was the name Peppa, but not in her handwriting. Sometimes at night she hears footsteps in the hallway, and a child's voice, software, not quite her own. It calls someone by name, and each time she feels more certain it's calling her.